the stillness of the campground. Tristan, sleeping peacefully with his daughters by his side, had no warning. A bullet fired from a distance pierced his tent, striking him in the head as he lay beside his little girl. The shock of it was almost too much to comprehend. Back at the campsite, Scott, who had been camping with Tristan and his kids, was woken around 4:45 a.m. by the sound of Tristan's youngest daughter crying. Initially, Scott assumed it was just a moment of distress that Tristan would handle. But as the minutes ticked by, the cries continued, longer, louder, desperate. Scott got out of his tent, thinking maybe Tristan hadn't heard. As he approached the tent, he could hear the muffled sounds of the girl still crying. When Scott finally opened the flap of the tent, he was greeted by a horrifying sight. Tristan, usually a heavy sleeper, was motionless, lying in a pool of his own blood. His two daughters, still in their pajamas, were seated on the bloodied floor, unaware of the nightmare that had unfolded. The killer had fired from somewhere nearby, recklessly or intentionally, sending a bullet straight into the tent, ending Tristan's life in an instant. The man responsible for this senseless act was later identified as 42-year-old Anthony Ruda, a criminal with a history of violent behavior. Ruda had been living illegally in the park, blending into the shadows of the forest, and his actions were just one in a string of mysterious, unsolved shootings around the campground. But the murder of Tristan Bodette was the most tragic, the one that finally forced the police to take notice. Ruda was arrested, and evidence linked him to the murder, but his trial was far from over. The man's erratic behavior in court only added to the chilling nature of the case, with many believing he was guilty of this senseless murder. But what remains even more terrifying is the possibility that he may have been part of something much larger, a series of uninvestigated shootings in the park that had left the area steeped in fear for over a year. For Erica, the nightmare was just beginning. The world she once knew, the life she had built with Tristan, was shattered. Her two young daughters were now left to grow up without a father. The loss was unbearable, and she filed a lawsuit against the agencies that had allowed the campground to remain open, despite the known dangers. The story of Tristan Bodette is a tale of wrong place, wrong time, of a family's perfect day ruined by a senseless act of violence. And yet, there is still so much unknown, so much darkness that lurks in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. On July 4th, 2012, the lively seaside town of Seward, Alaska, was abuzz with excitement. The Mount Marathon race, an event steeped in history, was about to begin. This wasn't just any race. It was a trial by fire, a torturous ascent up a rugged tree-studded peak, followed by a heart-pounding descent. Although the course was a mere 3 miles, its brutal incline made it notorious, a challenge many dreamed of conquering and few dared attempt. Among the hundreds who gathered at the starting line that year was 66-year-old Paul Lamont, a respected career counselor from Anchorage. For years, Paul had guided military personnel in their transition to civilian life, crafting resumes and offering sage advice. But outside the office, he was a man of action. Paul maintained an impressive level of physical fitness, frequently running through Alaska's wild and unforgiving landscape. Running the Mount Marathon race had long been a goal for him, something he'd put off time and again. But now, on this cool Independence Day afternoon, Paul was finally ready. When the gun fired at 3 p.m., the racers surged forward, a wave of color and determination against the backdrop of the towering mountain. Paul, not aiming for glory or records, set off at a steady pace. The throngs of spectators, including his own family, cheered from the sidewalks as the runners disappeared into the thick, evergreen-covered trail. A man of Paul's age and conditioning would typically finish the race in 2 hours or less. But by 5 p.m., the bustling finish line had grown quiet, and Paul had yet to appear. His family, initially unconcerned, grew more anxious with each passing minute. While they knew Paul wasn't racing to win, The fact that most runners had already returned made his absence increasingly worrying. Up on the mountain, the timing crew stationed at the summit began packing up their equipment. The last of the runners had come and gone, or so they thought. Then, just as they were ready to leave, Paul appeared, weary but determined. It was a relief to see him alive and well. The crew informed